Polynomial long division. If the polynomial cannot be factored or there are no common factors by which to divide, you must use long division. So we've looked at taking a polynomial and dividing it by a monomial, straightforward. We've looked at a polynomial that can be factored over a binomial, and we have common factors there so we can simplify things out, which those have both worked out relatively pleasantly. Well, what if that doesn't work? We can still divide. We're just going to have to use long division. So this is going to go back to old school long division where we use we use our box there to do the division. So we're going to take this trinomial and divide it by this binomial here. I'm going to put my dividend on the inside of my box, my divisor on the outside of my box, and I'm going to start to divide. So I'm looking at my x plus 5 going into just 3x. Well, that's not going to work because I can't do a monomial divided by a binomial. I'm not going to be able to multiply the binomial by anything that will give me a monomial. So I'm going to go to my second term. Now, what I want to pay attention to is just the beginning of the terms there. So I'm going to pay attention to my x and my 3x squared. So what times x is 3x squared? So basically 3x squared divided by x is 3x. So this is going to be the first term of my quotient. So I'm going to put 3x up here above the 9x. 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times 5 gives me positive 15x. And I'm going to subtract. So notice I'm going to subtract here. But again, when we worked with our systems of equations, this was something I recommended, that you change this to adding the opposite, just to kind of remind yourself that you needed to subtract here and you don't accidentally add when you get to that second term. So 3x squared minus 3x squared gives me nothing. 9x plus a negative 15x gives me negative 6x. So now I've got negative 6x. I'm going to bring down this negative 15 and start again. So negative 6x divided by x is negative 6. So negative 6 times x gives me negative 6x. Negative 6 times 5 gives me negative 30. Again, I'm going to subtract here, but again, I'm going to change that to adding the opposite. So I end up with 0, and I end up with 15. Now there's nothing left to bring down here, so we're going really old school here, and we're going to put a remainder. So to remember to find a remainder, I take my leftover here, and I place that as the numerator above my divisor as my denominator. So 15 over x plus 5. So my final quotient is 3x minus 6 plus 15 over x plus 5. Long division. Let's try another one. I'm going to again take my dividend, put that inside the box. My divisor, put it outside the box. I've got a binomial here, so I'm starting 2 in here. I'm going to take the n squared divided by n, which is n. So I bring an n up to the top. N times n is n squared. N times negative 2 gives me negative 2n. I'm going to subtract here. I'm going to change this to adding the opposite so I can remember what I'm doing. There we go. So I have n squared minus n squared is 0. 6n plus 6n gives me 8n. I'm going to bring down my 2. 8n divided by n is 8, so I'm going to bring an 8 up here. 8 times n is 8n. 8 times negative 2, negative 16. I'm subtracting, so I'm going to change that to adding the opposite. I'm going to subtract here. I get 0, and 2 plus 16 gives me 18 as a remainder here, so I have 18 over n minus 2. So n plus 8 plus 18 over n minus 2. All right, let's do one more. I've got 2r cubed plus 2r squared minus 4 divided by r minus 1. Now, one of the things you may notice here is that if we look at this kind of in descending order, kind of my standard form, I notice I have an r cubed, I have an r squared. I do not have an r to the first power, and then I go to r to the 0 power. So we want to pay attention to the fact that we're kind of missing a term if I think about going consecutively in order there. So I need to take that into account as I'm setting up my work here. So my original polynomial goes inside. So what I'm going to do is my 2r cubed plus 2r squared plus, I'm going to put a 0r in that spot, minus 4. I need to pay attention to the fact that I've got thirds, squareds. I don't have any of the firsts there. I have to fill that in. My divisor comes up in the front here. So again, we're going to start with 2r cubed divided by r is 2r squared. 2r squared times r gives me 2r cubed. 2r squared times negative 1 gives me negative 2r squared. I'm subtracting, so again, I'm going to change this all to adding the opposite. So I have 0, 2r squared plus 2r squared gives me 4r squared. Bring down that 0r. 4r squared divided by r is 4r. So 4r times r squared is 4r squared. 4r times negative 1 is negative 4r. Again, I'm subtracting. I'm going to change that to adding the opposite. So I bring this down. I get 0. 0r plus 4r is 4r. 4r divided by r is 4. 4 times r minus 1 is 4r minus 4, and I end up with no remainder there. So I end up with 2r squared plus 4r plus 4.